In 2018, scientists released 300,000 living creatures into a Scottish river that had been quietly dying for 50 years. 3 years later, something happened in that riverbed that published science said shouldn't have been possible. The creature is called the freshwater pearl mussel, and some individuals alive today are older than the United States itself. Confirmed shell surveys have recorded ages past 250 years, and one disputed record reportedly exceeded 280 years. This isn't a fish story. It's one of the most extreme survival stories in the entire animal kingdom, and it starts in the River Dee. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this animal is disappearing, and why bringing it back could save an entire river. The freshwater pearl mussel's scientific name is Margarittifera margarittifera, and it belongs to an ancient group whose lineage goes back roughly 200 million years. It's currently listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List, and killing one is a criminal offense in the United Kingdom. Populations across its entire range, from Arctic Russia to the northeastern United States, have dropped by 90% or more in the last century. An adult mussel grows to 10 to 14 centimeters, buries itself 5 to 10 centimeters deep in cold gravel riverbeds, and filters roughly 50 liters of water every single day. That filtering isn't a side effect. It's the mussel's entire job, pulling out fine sediment and organic particles so the river underneath stays clean. But here's the part that makes this species almost impossible to save without help. Its bizarre, two-stage life cycle. In midsummer, females release thousands of microscopic larvae, called glitchidia, directly into the water current. Those larvae can't survive alone, so they must attach to the gills of a juvenile Atlantic salmon, or a brown trout if salmon are scarce. They live there for weeks, sometimes months, quietly drawing nutrients from the fish's blood as they develop. Once ready, the young mussels drop off the salmon's gills and settle into the riverbed, where they stay buried and invisible for 5 to 15 years. This means if the salmon disappear from a river, the mussels lose their only path to the next generation, no matter how many adults remain. And if the mussels disappear, the salmon lose the filtration partner that keeps their spawning gravel clean enough to use. It's not full dependency, but it's about as close to it as two separate species can get in the wild. Scotland once held what was likely the most important population of this mussel anywhere in the British Isles. They were spread across the Highlands, the Cairngorms, the Galloway Forest, and parts of the Hebrides. But formal surveys by Scottish Natural Heritage, now Nature Scot, documented a population crash of roughly 95%, and over 97% in some catchments, between 1970 and the early 2010s. Some rivers that were once dense with mussels were reduced to a handful of aged survivors, with zero evidence of new juveniles settling for decades. That's the detail that should worry you. Those survivors were essentially the last generation, with no successors coming behind them. The causes stacked on top of each other: heavier sheep and cattle grazing, drainage of riverbank fields, and commercial conifer forests planted right up to the water's edge. Add peatland loss and rising phosphorus and nitrate levels from agriculture, and the gravel the mussels need simply stopped being clean enough to survive in. Atlantic salmon in the same rivers declined too, partly from mortality at sea, partly from the same habitat loss on land. When the salmon and the mussel decline together, there's no natural route back for either species. The whole cycle has to be rebuilt from outside. That's exactly what conservationists attempted on the River Dee in Aberdeenshire, one of Scotland's most important salmon rivers. The Dee runs about 140 kilometers from the Cairngorms to the North Sea, and its tributaries are some of the most studied salmon systems in the country. Surveys comparing 1990's mussel counts to more recent ones found declines of roughly 90% in some parts of the Dee's subcatchments. So Nature Scot, the University of Aberdeen, the Dee District Salmon Fishery Board, and several conservation groups launched a captive breeding program in the late 2000s. Here's exactly how they pulled it off, step by step, because the method itself is almost as remarkable as the result. Scientists collected glitchidia from gravid wild females, then deliberately infected captive-reared juvenile salmon in controlled tank conditions. They let the larvae encyst and develop naturally on the salmon's gills, just as they would in the wild river. Once the young mussels dropped off, the team released them into carefully chosen sections of river where the habitat had already been restored. In the summer of 2018, they released approximately 300,000 juvenile mussels into the River Dee, the largest release of its kind ever attempted in the United Kingdom. Local reporting confirmed this, was the first significant recruitment of young mussels into those river sections in decades. The project was funded by the Scottish government's environmental budget, the EU Life Programme, and non-profit donors including the River Dee Trust. Now here's the part that genuinely surprised the scientists running the program 3 years later. Surveys taken around 2021 found more juvenile mussels in the restocked sections than had been recorded there in decades. Published survival rates for captive-bred mussels elsewhere in Europe had typically run between 20 and 50% after the first year. The D's numbers, while still carrying some methodological caveats, came in at the upper end of what the existing science had considered even possible. And the effect wasn't just about mussel numbers. The riverbed itself started to change. Sections where the juveniles settled successfully showed reduced fine sediment buildup, slightly higher oxygen at gravel bed depth, and lower turbidity than nearby sections. One ecologist quoted in regional reporting said the filtering effect became suddenly visible because the river's particulate load had nowhere else to go. Think about what that actually means. An endangered animal that needed clean water to survive was, over time, helping clean the water itself. That's the ecosystem engineer effect scientists have documented in filter feeders for years, but rarely on a critically endangered species at this scale. Still, this isn't a finished success story, and the researchers themselves are the first to say so. Long-term survival of those 300,000 juveniles over decades is still completely unknown. As of 2024, formal conservation assessments still classify every Scottish pearl mussel river as unfavorable status under the Habitats Directive. None of Scotland's rivers currently meet the official target condition. The species actually needs to be considered safe. The Dee's salmon aren't in crisis by Scottish standards, but they still sit well below their historical numbers. And the whole restoration only works if the landscape around the river keeps improving too, fencing livestock out, restoring peatland, replanting native trees along the banks. Without that ongoing work, every juvenile mussel released is just being placed back into conditions that will eventually degrade again. So this isn't a one-time fix. It's a decades-long commitment stacked on top of a single dramatic release. And there's one more detail about how salmon and mussels depend on each other that we didn't even get into in this video. It's the part of the story that explains why some rivers might never recover, no matter how many mussels get released into them. I'm covering that exact mechanism in the next video, and it completely changes how you'll think about river restoration. Go watch it next, because once you understand that piece, this whole Dee project makes a lot more sense.